Good morning from a very chilly Nairobi. The weather is looking so promising, I must say. I'm Cecilia Maundu. I'm a digital security trainer. I'm a broadcast journalist. I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism. And today we are going to discuss a very thorny issue, which is data protection. But before I go to the business of the day, I have to thank our sponsors. This episode is made possible by an organization called Tactical Tech. Tactical Tech is based in Berlin. It is an international NGO that engages with citizens and civil society organizations to explore and mitigate the impact of technology and society. And we are looking at what is called the Data Detox Kit. The Data Detox Kit is basically gives you information on how to stay safe online. And today we are going to talk about data protection. We are going to talk about data breaches and everything. So my guest today will introduce himself because, as I always say, if I introduce them, I'll not do justice. So Mugambi, karibu sana to the show. I'm so happy to have you because I've been searching for you for a while, and I feel like, oh, wow, everything happens at the right time.
Yeah.
Welcome to Digital Data Podcast.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. So my name is Mugambi Laibuta. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I'm also an information privacy manager and a PhD student researching and writing on privacy and data protection in Kenya. Yeah.
So you see now, I would not have done justice introducing you. Karibu sana again.
Asante, thank you.
So data protection.
Yeah.
First of all, demystify what is data protection.
So, um, so we have to go back to the right to privacy. So, over a long period of time, I mean, in history, there's always been a right to privacy. It doesn't matter which culture one is from or what side of the continent or the country. There's always this issue of privacy, and privacy can be defined in different ways. It can be privacy of your body, privacy of your house, whereby we found that in different cultures, maybe not all cultures, you'll find that in a homestay there'll be separate rooms for the children, for the parents, etc. There'll be like a fence and that kind of privacy. Then, when like elderly people are having conversation, if you are not within that age set or age group, you'll not be welcome to that conversation. When village elders are making decisions, some of them will be held in camera during initiation periods, whether it's girls or boys. They'll be held in seclusion, and there'll be some secrecy to it. So then, as time went by, the issue of information privacy was not there within our culture, but privacy was there. The concept of privacy. So, in the last maybe 150 years, there's been this question of information privacy, especially with the advent of technology. Like, for example, in the 1890s, there are some legal scholars who wrote and said cameras and the press was infringing on people's privacy because taking photos and publishing those photos and people's information. So, the issue of information privacy started coming up. Then, of course, after the Second World War, we had the international human rights instruments conceptualize the privacy as a legal right. So when privacy was conceptualized as a legal right, and with with the improvement of technology, now there's a question, and coming out of the advent of the computer, there's the issue that information, data, especially personal data, information that can identify you and me, needed to be protected, and this stemmed from the overarching right to privacy. It is one of the concepts of the right to privacy. So for years, especially in Europe, the issue of information privacy as a right within statutes was conceptualized in the European Union. Then you look at in the early 90s, there's what we call Convention 108 that talked about automatic processing of personal data. Then that brought forth in the EU, we had the directive, the Data Protection Directive that gave birth to the GDPR. And with that, many countries around the world also started looking at this. And even us in Kenya, our independence constitution it didn't have a right to privacy per se, but it had concepts of the right to privacy. For example, your bodily integrity, that your house couldn't be searched without reason. Then, when we came up with the constitution in 2010, it had that individual right to privacy that was explicit. And within it, there's when you look at Article 31, there's a provision that deals with our information not to be required, and that now stems for the issue of data protection. But even before the Constitution, the Parliament had discussed this issue, the need for a Data Protection Act. Like when you go to parliamentary Hansard, you'll see these conversations when the dawn of the millennium, when the technology bubble
Yeah, it was
was there.
literally busting, yes.
Yeah, and these arguments were there. MPs were like, "We need a Data Protection Act. We need a Data Protection Act," but it never materialized. The Data Protection Act came to be in 2019. So that is like just a short history and about where the data protection stems from, and also the fact that data protection is about information, and it's about information that can identify a
You.
human being. When you look at countries like South Africa, there's data protection also for organizations, like a company, a society, etc. But for us in Kenya, the data protection rights are for a human being, an individual, a natural person.
Okay, Mugambi, now that you mentioned that it did start yesterday, because with the advent of technology, we just believe like data protection started the other day. I just would like to know from you, how can we make people understand the value of their information? I'm coming from the point of when I conduct digital security training, I've gotten this question so many times, like, of, I have nothing to hide. I'm not famous, so I don't really care whether they track me or not. If anything, it's better they track me because they'll give me links to the things that I like. But as I said before, we are talking about this data detox kit, and one of the things that it keeps saying is every time they trace you, it is information that can be traced to you as an individual. They can compile everything about you and even be linked to you. So how can we make the public understand the value of their data?
Actually, the public understands the value of their data. Look at it this way. There's information you make public, there's information you don't make public. So the concept that people are not aware, they are aware. Like, for example, things that happen in your house. There are a lot of things that are not in the public domain. How you woke up, what you ate for breakfast, whether somebody is under medication. And you see, this is information that you might find. A lot of people want your financial status. This is information you keep private. But then there are other things, other data, or other information that people try to create. Sort of, they say it's a balance. Look at it this way: if somebody is using social media, let's say Twitter, Facebook, etc., they'll not publish their bank account number and their balance and their PIN. Most probably they'll post that they're at a party, they're at Sema Box, they're doing a podcast, or
Yes.
they're having a party, or they're traveling. I mean, it's more things that they feel that it's not too critical for them. But there are also people who will never post such because they value such information.
Yes.
So the question, it depends who you ask. What do they value in terms of their privacy? What kind of information are they open to be in the public? So that said, is that the question you asked, so how do you make people know? Of course, people know that there's need for privacy. But then I think what people don't know is that what you are describing, sometimes people don't know that the information that you put out there could be used against you for certain reasons. And that is what people don't understand. Of course, there are many campaigns to educate people, but not as much, not as should be. For example, when you look at the Kenya Data Protection Act, it provides that the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is supposed to carry out public education. And they've been doing this, especially through their social media. So if you go to their social media, you'll see clips in different languages. You'll see information that they publish every other day. Whether is that sufficient? Of course, it's not sufficient. But I think within the kind of resources that they do have, that is information they are pushing out there. I think it pushes from one point to another. It's not sufficient, and of course, they've continually said that they need support and resources to make this information more widely known. Can you give an example? When you look at when the GDPR was passed by the European institutions.
Can you define GDPR?
So the European General Data Protection Regulation, the European version of our Data Protection Act. So when it was passed, there was a 2-year period before it became effective, and within that what I can call a grace period, or that period, is that European institutions really did this public education. But of course, you see, they had the resources. As here is what we see, that there's lack of resources. But what has been happening is people like yourself, people like myself, also putting information out there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't have to be just the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. You look at civil
Society,
society,
the media.
the media have really been bringing about these issues. Because you look about when we were registered to political parties against our will, it became a whole big debate.
Yes.
When people are discussing the issue of digital lenders, there's a whole public debate, and
Yes,
that
yes.
creates a certain awareness.
Okay. Internet of Things. We live in an era whereby we want like everything digitized. I want to hear from your perspective. What are the dangers of some of the Internet of Things? Because now we get very excited and we imagine like my fridge telling me that
Yeah.
this and this is lacking, my TV and all that. But we know there are so many factors underlying that. Please tell us more about it and start by defining what Internet of Things in case some of our
Uh,
audience
I
don't know.
mean, it's simply there's technology that whether it's wearable technology. Like for me, I have a I have a smartwatch. By the evening, tell me whether I've walked the number of steps
Steps
that
that your
I'd
heart
promised
rate.
myself, my heart rate, etc. We have these smart TVs that connect to the internet, as you say. We have fridges. I mean, people have vehicles that can tell you that this part is not working, that part is not working. And you see, it's that balance. You see, even me, I mean, as a data protection professional, I know that there's certain information that is being collected by this smartwatch, but I'm okay with it to a certain extent. Then the question that a lot of us don't ask about, one, do we read the terms and conditions? Because these digital the companies or the organizations that track this movement, because you see the cloud service is not in Kenya. Well, if you're
Yeah,
using,
yes, yes.
and the question is this data, who has access to
To
it?
it, yes.
Sometimes you look at the terms and conditions of the privacy notices and the privacy policies of this Internet of Things, and they're like, they're collecting too much information. And by the, as I say, Internet of Things can be anything, anything. I mean, your smartphone,
Your TV.
your TV, your radio, and the fact that it's connected to, for example, it's connected to the internet, and such is and it's also collecting data from you, whatever data it could be. I mean, if you're using, for example, Netflix, at sometimes it makes suggestions what movies or
You
what
should
series you
watch.
watch, and when you
Yes.
look at them, you're like, yeah, it's
Like relatable.
relatable. The same way, if you use YouTube, you can tell if somebody has been using your YouTube account, because you can tell, no, 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 this is not the
Not
kind of
enough
content
data.
that
Yes, I watch.
yeah. So there are certain aspects to it. So one is that the people who manufacture people who provide this Internet of Things. The question is, to what extent do they comply with basic data protection principles, privacy principles, cybersecurity principles? Like a few years back, Garmin, which produces these watches, these wearable watches, had a hack, and people could not had been hacked, and people could not access their data for quite a number of days. And the question is, those people who hacked it, what kind of data did they access? Another example, that the U.S. Army, for example, at some point was telling its staff not to use these watches. Why? Because these watches, you see, when you're going for a run or when you're working out, it identifies exactly your exact location.
Sure, yeah.
So I say, if people could access this information, then they're able to know, this person is in a certain, what is happening in this location, that a lot of people are using these devices, and that could be a security issue for this personnel. So as I said, one, we look at what do the manufacturers of these devices, how do they comply with the provisions of data protection principles, data subject rights? How are they prepared? What kind of level of security do they provide? Like, for example, Apple sort of prides itself of providing a higher level of security.
Yes, yes, yes.
But we've also seen, for example, I mean, when Pegasus came
Yes,
to
the
when
spyware.
Pegasus came to light, it was identified that even Apple products can be hacked. So where are you safe? When are you not safe? And it ends up about a personal decision whether you'll use these gadgets, and whether you understand what kind of information these gadgets are collecting from you.
But Mugambi, you as a lawyer, you know some of this language they use in terms and conditions. is language that is not, how do I say it? It's not language that every common person can be able to understand. We call them dark patterns. So should they be also be compelled to be able to exactly elaborate, coming from a country where English is not our first language?
Yeah, so you'll find that, for example, in the US, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission,
Mm.
has really been going, has really been taking this digital organization or social media platform to task because of this what you're calling dark patterns,
Hmm.
using language that the normal person may not be in a position to
Exactly.
understand.
Hmm.
And what they say is that you need to couch these terms and conditions in plain and simple language that the average person needs to understand. When you look at EU law, it stays the same. Terms and conditions should be couched in simple, plain terms.
Hmm.
When you look at our Kenyan Consumer Protection Act, it says that contracts between the consumer, the consumer and the seller, or for example, the vendor, should be couched in plain, simple terms. But then you find that, of course, we as lawyers, we want to complicate life and we don't want to couch these terms in
I'm
simple
glad
terms
you've owned up.
for obvious reason.
Mhm.
So, and you'll find that it's not just in data protection policies. You'll find that legal practitioners sort of think that when you don't speak simply or plainly, that I think it's an ego boost.
Mhm.
But then you find that, as you said, when you don't become direct, simple on these terms and conditions, then you don't meet the purpose.
Mhm.
And that's what we need to aim at to reach certain purpose. And when you look at, for example, so when Safaricom, at some point, Safaricom said they have simplified their terms and conditions. And when you go and read, you see the terms are simplified to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Whether they're perfect is neither here
Yeah,
nor
no,
there.
there.
But the
Mhm.
fact is that they've simplified to a
Mhm.
common mwananchi, and they've put it both in English and in Swahili. And so those are some of the initiatives that really need to be adopted. One example I asked my class, because I teach a class on legal writing, and I asked, how many of you have read terms and conditions of your insurance contract? Or even terms and conditions of Facebook or Twitter or whatever platform. We hardly read because some of these terms and conditions also go to tens and tens of pages. But I think the point that I love that you bring about is that they needs to be simple and clear. They need to be direct so that somebody who has a basic understanding of the English language can comprehend. Even if we say we put it in Swahili, how many of us understand the kind of Swahili written Swahili?
Sanifu.
Kiswahili
Sanifu.
sanifu. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you talked about hacking. Recently, there was a case of data breaching in one of these major supermarkets in Kenya, and they actually owned up to it, and they talked about that their data was breached. I would want to know, like me as an individual who shops there, first of all, what should I be concerned about? Second of all, can I actually sue them?
Of course, you should be afraid.
Mm.
One of the things, so simply, each organization that processes personal data, and I mean that collects, stores, analyzes, or shares data, should comply with principles set out under the Data Protection Act.
Mhm.
And one of the most important principles of Data Protection Act, for example, data protection by default and by design, is that you're supposed to put in place technical and organizational measures to one of the concepts of technical and organizational measures is security. And when you look at security, it's not just security on data protection, it's security on your overall installation of
Relation,
your
yes.
overall operation.
Mhm.
Because data protection does not exist in a silo. Data
Mhm.
protection exists within an ecosystem of business. So the question is, what are your data protection strategies? What are your cybersecurity strategies? What are your physical security strategies? So that you're not only protecting personal data, but you're also protecting institutional data, trade secrets, strategies, etc.
Mhm.
And you'll find that an institution that doesn't protect its strategies, its business data, etc., will also not protect personal data to a good extent. So, if there is a breach, there needs to be an inquiry. Before the breach, to what extent was this organization, what measures did this organization put in place to ensure that there is no breach? And during the breach, how did they react? One, were they able to identify that there was a breach in time? Were they able to stop any further damage? Did they inform the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner in time because it's supposed to be within 72 hours? Did they inform the data subjects, the people whose data might have been leaked within a reasonable time? What measures are they taking into account post post the event. Now, if they did not follow the provisions of the Data Protection Act, of course, one, you can make a complaint to the Office of the Data Protection Commission. Say, your personal data was with this institution, there was a hack, you've suffered some damage, and you want them to take into task. So what the Data Commissioner will do is carry out an investigation and look at before the breach, during the breach, and after the breach, what kind of strategies did this organization put in place. So when you make a complaint, the Data Commissioner will carry out an investigation. Both parties, yourself and the organization, will give you an opportunity to say what you want to say. Then the Data Commissioner may make a finding whether these people need to be fined or they need to be given an administrative notice, a notice to say you need to improve the following, or a fine to say no, you violated provisions of the Act. We are going to fine you X amount of money, and the Act provides for 5 million shillings or 1% of annual revenue, whichever is lower. But also the same Act provides for damages, that if as a data subject, that because of this breach, for example, or violation of the Data Protection Act, you've suffered some sum of harm, then you're entitled to some damages. The damages may be awarded by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, or also even the courts. And of course, if you are not happy with the decision the Data Commissioner makes, you can appeal to the High Court.
Wow. I didn't know all that. And you see, as you said, like when the data protection law came into being, I feel like if there was no enough, what do we call it? Like public, first of all, public participation. Second of all, we were not enlightened because I didn't know that part that for example, the way there was a breach, me as a person who shops there have a right to complain and find out more about when did it take place, where does that leave me. So to my second question, well, when it comes to personal data breaches, for example, people who have like Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts, and they've been hacked, I would like to know like the responsibility of these platforms, because it has been said over and over again, and it is becoming like an exaggerated cliche that we are living in the data economy and everything is about data. But what is their personal responsibility towards my data? Because I'm on their platform. They have a legal responsibility to
You
protect
remember I
me.
asked, have you read the terms and conditions
Yeah.
and the community guidelines of these of these platforms? Because sorry for interrupting, but you see that's the simple question.
Mhm.
Because within their terms and conditions and their community guidelines, they said if you've been hacked, you need to send an email to you. Sometimes they tell you you have to hold a newspaper of the day. You have to carry your ID, then you take a photo, then you send to them, that kind of thing. So there are people who are able to retrieve or to rescue their accounts. There are those who are not able to. Then they also tell you need to put in place like two-factor authentication.
Authentication,
But then
yes.
you find like Twitter has removed that. If you want two-factor authentication, you have to pay. Now that poses a challenge. Then it means that your security within that
Has
platform
been lowered, yes.
is diminished. But purely what the only remedies within their terms and conditions and within their community guidelines. Because for example, I think all of these platforms, none of them has a headquarter or an office within
Yeah.
Kenya. But the good thing is that I don't know whether you've been following the Meta case with this
Yeah, exactly.
digital workers,
The content
and
moderators.
yeah, the content moderators, and where the court said that Meta can actually be sued in Kenya.
Kenya, yeah.
So it means that this opens up an opportunity for Kenyans that if you're not happy with how these platforms are behaving, then you can sue them within our local courts.
But how easy is, because this case of Meta is like a groundbreaking case.
Yeah.
So how easy is it even to do it? For example, I talk about online violence on this platform, and one of the things that I've realized is there's a lot of underreporting. And when you ask the victims, they tell you even the thought of the legal process is the thought of it just makes you sick. So it's also not like a walk in the park. Nevertheless, that does not mean that people should not be able to report or people should not be able to take legal measures. And also now brings me to another question, an article that I read, and you're the author of the article, and I think I've even crammed them
Yeah.
because they were talking about the cyber harassment law. Number one, it doesn't contextualize the crime.
Yeah.
Number two, it is actually leaning on infringing on of freedom of expression. I would like you to expound more on that.
See, cyber harassment, it comes in many ways.
Mhm.
It can be cyber stalking. it can be
Doxing,
doxing,
yeah.
it can be sharing of internet information without non-consensual
The
sharing
sharing of
of intimate information.
what they like calling revenge porn.
Yeah, it can be basically cyberbullying itself. So we have the Computer Misuse and Cyber Crimes Act that provides for these crimes. Cyber harassment, there's a penalty to it. I think it's the 20 million shillings or an imprisonment term. I can't remember exactly. There's the issue of non-consensual sharing of intimate images, and there's a penalty to it. But the challenge is that the legal ecosystem around it, like as you aptly pointed to it, is that if you report this at your local police, they'll be asked, you were insulted. I mean, so ulitukanwa na umetukanwa tu enda tu. I mean, what I mean, you've been insulted. So what's the big issue?
Yes.
So there's not good appreciation of this. But DCI, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, has a cyber unit. But you see, let's say for example, you're in deep Meru and you're experiencing cyber harassment, which means that you have to come and look for a DCI, the
In
DCIC cyber security unit. But then you'll find that there's been no successful prosecution of these crimes. And then secondly is also the process is it's quite expensive, so it means that the
Extremely
person who is the
expensive.
victim or the survivor of this online crimes, now you become re-victimized by even the legal process. But there are possible avenues. Of course, one of the possible avenues is to use the platforms themselves. It's within Meta platforms, Twitter, etc. You can report and use the community guidelines to take some of this information down. But you'll find that some of these platforms do not, they may not understand the language which you're being harassed. You could be, you could be harassed in Somali, or you're being harassed in Kimeru or in Kitaitan. So they don't have content moderators who will identify that this is, it's different if it's Swahili or English. So that is also another challenge. Another challenge, of course, I've talked about is reporting. Where do you report and how does that move forward? But I think there's some certain initiatives to improve this. Of course, the DCI has been on top of this. I think UNFPA has been working on this, especially violence of women online,
Yes.
like providing guidelines for police station, police officers, training them, training judicial officers, prosecutors, etc., so as to make the legal process a bit easier for the survivors or the victims of some of these online crimes.
Wow. I think that is, as you said, like we are yet to get a successful case that has been prosecuted. There was this lady, I think she was former Miss Kenya, and her intimate photos were shared by her partner then, and she went to court. And when I read her story, I think she was, I think, given only 1 million Kenya shilling.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you see, that is within a civil process.
Yes.
What we are discussing before here is a criminal process.
Yes.
So the criminal process is really not, in strict sense, it's not available. But then one option that you're mentioning, if you're a survivor of these crimes, you can just, I think she's called Roshanara Ibrahim.
Roshanara, yeah.
And yeah, she went court, filed on issues of the right to privacy, and she was awarded 1 million. And as you point out, is 1 million sufficient? Is it not sufficient? But on the good side is that the courts are listening to these matters and are making awards. So you see, if there were more people filing these suits and getting damages awarded to them with the courts, the better. But then you see, even in this process, you need a lawyer. You need a lawyer. It's a court process. Yes, it takes time, even without leave alone the money, the resources, the time. There is, you need to go to the court or to access the courts for a sustained period of time. That also has a cost to it. But I think, as I said, I said in an event last week or a week before, is that if there was a pool of funds from, because I was saying, like, to UNFPA, if you provided funds, for example, where people who are experiencing these crimes online could access legal representation, and whereby the criminal process fails, then you can go, it's like legal aid, then you can access the civil process and at least get damages awarded to you, whether it's 1 million. But I think when it's something and it becomes more common, then you'll find that perhaps it may serve as a deterrent.
Yeah, I read somewhere somebody said they destroy your reputation and all they get is a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. There is something that I was reading the other day, and you are the right person to talk about it. Something called personal identifiable information. PIN. Your data is useful if it's identified, if it's identifiable to you. Please expound on this.
You see, whether data is identifiable and identifiable, because even if your data is anonymized or pseudonymized, these days there are tools to de-anonymize or de-pseudonymize you. So you find that people, all they do, they need to collect different databases and different data points, and they can say, this is this person. I can give an example. So in the US recently, there was a priest, who was in, so this priest was using gay dating apps. And somebody was able to triangulate and know who this person was by using other information. By a combination of not just this information, but many other data points. I know, this person accessing this gay dating site is a priest, and they outed the person. So you see, so it's not just about the information being it can be it because when you look at it usually says identify. It can identify you directly, or it can be used to identify you. Because you see, for example, if I come to your estate, Cecilia, there might be 10 Cecilias. Then I can say Cecilia, who's X years old. Then it narrows it down. If there were 10, we move now maybe to 7. Then you say Cecilia, who lives in this block. Then we narrow it down to 5. Cecilia, who is a journalist. Then maybe 2. Then we say something else specific. Cecilia, who has a cousin. So you see, now we are narrowing. At the moment when we said Cecilia, we didn't identify you directly, but we can use other data points now to narrow down to which Cecilia we are talking about.
So, Mugambi, I think I want to ask, are we ever going then to achieve that level of privacy that we think we have? Because listening to your conversation, I'm like,
Now we have AI.
Yeah.
And Web3 is coming.
Yes.
So I think it's not about the issue of the level of it's about what protections do we have, what legal protections do we have, because with all this technology is opening us up to more ways to identify us, and this new technology is able to extract more data from us. So to me, what I say is that is the legal framework, is the ecosystem conducive enough to provide us remedies or options, because even the law itself, it's lower, because now Kenya, we have not even fully implemented the data protection act. Now we are talking about AI. In the AI, in the last month, 1,000 AI platforms have been launched into the market. So our privacy options are dimming, but the question is what options are available to us. So if there are options available to us, it means that some of these people who are developing this platform will be motivated, whether it's through fines or being told to shut down etc., to protect our privacy and data protection rights.
Okay. So, to a question, the African Union is advocating for what we call a free trade continental in instances whereby now we can be trading with countries freely. What are some of the measures that can be put in place to protect data across borders?
So there are things I've said before that people didn't like, because we are discussing this. We are having negotiation of these trade agreements, and one of the questions that is there where are the data protection custodians of the continent, where are the data protection commissioners across the continent in this conversation, and you find that they are not there. Where are the cybersecurity experts? Because this free trade agreement also has a huge component on the digital economy.
Exactly.
And it's being negotiated, the discussion are by these politicians, these trade technocrats, but there's this essential component of cybersecurity experts, of data protection commissioner, data protection authorities. They are missing in this conversation. And then we find in Africa, we have the Malabo Convention on the Convention on Cybersecurity and Data Protection. Up to now, it's not effective because it needs 15 signatures. I think by now we only have 13 signatures. So it shows that there is no political goodwill, even from African countries. Kenya itself has not ratified this convention.
Yes.
Then the African Union also came up with the AU data framework. When you look at the data framework, it just makes broad policy statement that we propose that it will be good if countries did ABCD. But if countries are not ratifying the convention, who tells you that they will comply with provisions of the AU data policy framework? So there are those gaps, and I think Africa will get the short end of the stick because we are not as united. We look at how
Very
Europe
true.
negotiates some of these free trade agreements. They negotiate them as a block. For us, you find that even in our Data Protection Act, when you look at the Kenya Data Protection Act, the Uganda Data Protection Act, the Tanzania they are different. They are not the same. We haven't decided what is our standard as Africans, what our minimal, what are the bare minimum provisions, what are our benchmark. And with that, it means that as negotiations are being held on the digital economy, we will definitely get the short end of the stick.
Okay, you talked about political goodwill. Do you think that's achievable? Because, first of all, we are talking about people who are not aware of the issues of cybersecurity. Because when you look at the people in power, most of them are digital immigrants. They're yet to know the importance of this. Let me say that. So, do you think political goodwill is achievable? Because I remember there's this, it's called what? The special panel, the UN special panel, I can't remember, the cooperation or something like that. They talked about the importance of political goodwill in able to achieve so much in the sector of cybersecurity. Do you think it is possible? Because another thing we are told, we need to explain to the policymakers because even themselves sometimes they don't understand.
Let's just go back. Why haven't these politicians ratified the Malabo Convention on cybersecurity and data protection? The fact that they have not signed, it shows lack of political goodwill. Whether it's achievable, it's a yes and no. When you look at countries like, for example, like South Africa, Mauritius, their level of data protection and the support that they give their data protection authorities is quite high compared to us. So when you look at those two countries, for example, as an example, is that you see they have moved towards a system whereby that there's some political goodwill to support this process. Then you have African countries that don't have data protection laws at all.
At all, yeah.
Then you have countries that have data protection laws, but the laws have not been operationalized. Or even if they have been operationalized, they have not appointed a data protection commission or a data protection authority. Or even if there is a data protection authority, that data protection authority has not been provided the resources and independence that it requires to carry out its mandate. So this just shows, I mean, these are issues that have perhaps these politicians have not conceptualized as priority areas. Because you see, we are playing catch up. People are talking about that, and you'll find a lot of people are saying, our law looks like the GDPR, blah blah blah. But then you see the European Union are even moving to have other laws: the Digital Markets Act, the Data Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act. But as we are still in this watered down, Africa is still in this watered down GDPR kind of laws. So in my engagement, especially within the political class, that conviction is not there. And you need that conviction for this political goodwill. But the good thing that has happened in Kenya, I think, for example, is that to a certain extent, they've given the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner some leeway and some resources. Because it's, to be honest, in Kenya, it's quite impressive for a new institution to have the resources that it has and a secretariat.
I mean, we are a trailblazer.
Yeah, for the short time that they have been in existence, that really, a lot of institutions that are established by statutes need to fight for years on end, even to get that grounding. But for us, at least, there is some movement forward. So I hope that the conviction by the politicians will grow, and these convictions will translate to something tangible.
Let's hope so. Let's keep our fingers crossed. So, most of the information which is collected is sustained by advertisers and sold commercially to e-marketing, and they're the main they're the people who target our information. So I'm just curious to find out what, like, from the legal perspective, what should be done, because our data is being used for their commercial purposes. Shouldn't I also gain from my own personal data? Shouldn't I, like, and I'm talking about financially, shouldn't I gain from my own data now that it's being sold? Why can't I gain from it?
There's been that debate on should I be able to sell my data, but it also boils down to the issue of consent. because one of the core principles of commercial use of data is that you cannot collect, store, and use personal data for commercial purposes unless there is express consent,
Consent, yes.
and that you should provide options for people to opt out. So if I opted in, you should make it easier for me to
To
opt
opt
out.
out, yes.
This principle on whether I should be able to sell my and now it's a quite academic conversation, but perhaps it's something that needs to be explored. That if I'm okay with my data being out there, and what data points am I okay, and should I also benefit financially of that? I've not come across it's something that's there in academic papers where it also states that if I make my data public, there should be certain parameters, that there should be certain principles in application.
Action.
I don't think yet there's a perhaps, but I've not come across any law or policy within any country that will allow for this process, because there's also the question of exploitation, that you'll find that vulnerable groups will possibly be exploited with such
Yes.
with such a proposal. So how do you create a balance? But for me, I think if I can sell my data and earn a few coins,
Why
why
not?
not?
Yes.
But you see, that's personal. We also have to think about the effect this will have in the community or
Community,
in society at
yeah,
large.
at large. Last time when I interviewed you, we talked about health data because I remember there's one point you said which stuck into my mind how important it is to store health data, especially for purposes of research and all that. So I'm just curious to find out for how long should they hold my information, like my health records? And what responsibility do they have to me to tell me that this information of yours is here, and it's going to be used for these purposes?
Um, so you see, when you look at data protection laws, they
Mm.
also provide the processing of personal data for a public purpose, for
Mhm.
a public interest purpose. Public health is a public interest purpose.
Yes.
And you'll find that this data, and also what needs to be that the people, in as much as for public interest, there needs to be policies that are very clear. Why are they collecting this data? Who are they going to share this data with? How are they going to keep it secure? I've said how long will they keep it for what period of time? And those are some of the questions. The focus now shifts on either the Ministry of Health or the counties that is holding this data. To what extent have they complied with the provisions of the Data Protection Act? In as much as they are doing this for a public purpose, but they also need to ensure the security. They also need to ensure that this data is only be used for the purpose it was intended. It's not being sold to for commercial purposes. People with illegal motives do not have access to this data. So it is the infrastructure, the technical and organizational measures put in place by these healthcare providers that we should be asking about. Yeah.
Ah, and so the law, the data protection law, does it talk about anything to do with health data?
Yeah, it does, because health data, you look at Section 2 of the Data Protection Act, it classifies health data as sensitive personal data. If you look at provisions of the Data Protection Act, it says sensitive health data requires a higher level of protection. Like, for example, health data should be processed by a licensed healthcare provider. For example, somebody who's at the direction of a healthcare provider. When you look at the general regulations, they provide that one of the public purposes for processing personal data is for health purposes. So there's provision for
For
this.
that.
The question, as I said, is whether these institutions that are processing this data have achieved a certain level, an appreciable level of organizational and technical measures to protect this data.
Interesting. So, to my last question, which is the parting shot, I'm just curious to find out how vigilant can we be in protecting our data?
I mean,
What is our responsibility as usalama unaanza na sisi?
yeah, correct. I mean, the thing. So there's what we call cyber hygiene.
Cyber hygiene, which is mentioned in the data detox kit I
Yeah.
talked about earlier.
So, I mean, if people want to listening to this podcast will want to know about cyber, you can go online and go to YouTube, listen to podcasts on cyber hygiene. But there are certain basic principles of cyber hygiene. One is, what data do you put out there? Do you put out data that is too personal? For example, somebody can know from your from your social media, they can know your age, they know where you are born, they know your mother, they know your spouse, they know your children, they know your children's date of birth. So what kind of data do we put out there? Then secondly, like you talked about social media, do you use these two-factor
For
authentication?
sure.
If you're using financial services, two-factor authentication, how strong are your passwords? Do you use passwords like Cecilia 123 or Cecilia, then you put your age or where you live, and you see, so issues of strong passwords. Also, do you update your apps on your
Yeah.
phone or apps on your laptop frequently? Do you use a good antivirus? Do you use firewalls? Do you
VPNs.
use VPNs? Do you keep your gadgets secure when you're not using them? Do you just allow anybody to use your gadgets as they wish? Do you just use any public Wi-Fi? Uh, the thing is that you get into somewhere and they're like, oh, what is your password, Wi-Fi password? And you see, this is something that we should use at a very and it should not be the norm. We should not normally use public Wi-Fi, but of course, see, if it's free, a lot of us like, okay,
And it's exciting. I mean, they say the first thing they ask is, what is your password?
yeah. Then we also have to watch the kind of SMSs or messages or emails that we receive. Some of them could be phishing, they could be fakes. So you can say, this one they're selling nice product that I love, and you want to click. You click, then you make yourself vulnerable.
Vulnerable, yes.
So there are a lot of steps that you and I can undertake to minimize the possibility of a breach, but you can't 100% minimize it. But there are steps, you like what I've mentioned. You can have strong passwords, updating your application, not using any Wi-Fi, not giving your device to anybody just to use, and that way we are able to achieve a higher level of protection.
Thank you so much. Everything that you've mentioned is in the Data Detox Kit. Please check it out. And one thing I would want to add, like your Wi-Fi at home, please don't use your real name. For example, if you are Mama Boy, don't say Mama Boy's Wi-Fi. Look for a name. You can even call it incoming virus, because if somebody is trying to target you, they will easily find you because of the name. So, Laibuta, thank you so much. I'm super grateful because we have been able to tap into your wealth of knowledge, and I'm looking forward to having you again here to discuss more on the issue of Data Protection Act.
Thank you, Cecilia, for
As-
inviting me. Really
Asante
appreciate.
sana, asante sana.
Karibu.
As I said earlier, this episode has been made possible by an organization called Tactical Tech, which is based in Berlin, and we are looking at what we call their Data Detox Kit. And Laibuta has given all the nuggets that are in the Data Detox Kit. So see you next time.